no twathaga na hinya twe motitore tutiagetheka ne ndo wa kuroira bũrũri witũ.
From the torture that happened to the dispossession, the British have pretty much gotten away with it.
It's not only targeting Kenya, it is targeting the entire Africa. They talk about Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. They talk about Belgian Congo.
Was there truly a transition between colonial and post-colonial Kenya? There's a very thin line.
The British Army are the backbones of the sex work business.
He forced himself on me.
This was a British soldier?
Yes.
But we haven't tried to cover up anything. We've assisted all the way through.
I feel like we are still under slavery in a different way, in a capitalistic way.
This is classical imperialism. This is classical neocolonialism.
"60 years ago, a black Kenyan like me couldn't walk through this library. It was for whites only. Britain colonized my country and used it as a playground for labor and exploitation. This year we celebrate 6 decades of independence. But how much has really changed? We've not only uncovered the hidden history of British colonialism in Kenya, but found that its legacy of exploitation and violence lives on today." Britain colonized what is now Kenya in 1895, first as the East Africa Protectorate and in 1920 as a British Crown colony. By the 1950s, white settlers had stolen almost 7.5 million acres of land. Kenyan communities had resisted colonialism from the beginning, culminating in the 1950s Mau Mau revolt, a guerrilla army that was fighting back. Muthoni Wakirima was the only female field marshal leading a unit of Mau Mau men in resistance against colonial powers.
No twathaga na hinya ndiakeigirie nĩ ũndũ wa kũmeherera nĩgetha nĩ ũndũ wa kũrũĩra bũrũri witũ nĩ ũndũ mũndũ ũrĩa wathanaga gũkũ nĩ Mũngeretha tũtiakendire kũruta Mũngeretha gũkũ ndaumaga gĩthaka ngathiĩ ngera mũrũngũ ũcio ũkorwo Nairobi ũgĩthiĩ kwanyu mere ũguo.
After a brutal war against the Mau Mau to try and avert independence, the British were forced to go back home in 1963. They left, but not from everywhere. In fact, the UK military presence in Kenya is still its biggest in Africa. After independence, the British maintained a military base here in Nanyuki, Laikipia, called Batuk, and they've never left. Every year, 3,000 British troops train here. Now they say they're contributing to the economy of the country, but what lies in the shadows of this tale is a story of abuse of power. With allegations of rape, murder, and violence, the chilling echoes of British colonialism still ring true today.
Huyu ni Agnes.
Hapa alikuwa na miaka ngapi?
6 ama 7. Na hapa ni yeye wakiwa shule. Lakini sasa ni mtoto wake ni Stacy akiwa mdogo, akiwa mwaka na miezi hapo. Tulikuwa tumeenda kwa hiyo nini ya mama yake kuwekelea maua kwa kaburi. Lakini iko juu kabisa, si hapa karibu. Tukukuwa na mahali ya nini, tukukuwa na shamba. Sasa ilibidi nimwambie kila kitu, nimwambie venye kulienda. Mama yake walienda matembezi na marafiki wake. Kwenye walienda wa kufurahia sherehe zao, akakutana na mzungu. Kukutana na mzungu, hakupatikana tena. Tukakaa kama miezi 2 ama 3, ndio akapatikana akiwa ameuawa. Sasa ananiulizaga kwa nini huyo mzungu aliua mama yake kwa nini?
Agnes Wanjiru was murdered by a British soldier in March 2012. She was just 21 years old with a 5-month-old daughter. Her body was found decomposed in a septic tank 2 months later. She'd been stabbed in the stomach, had a blow to her chest, and may have been alive when she was drowned. Her family say that the British Army is protecting the soldier and covering up the murder.
Tuseme pande zote ya huku kwetu na ya huko ni kama wataki hii mambo, sababu hata huku kwetu hakuna vyenye tunajua na huko hakuna vyenye tunajua. Ni kama wote wamekaa kama wamefisha.
He took me to the tank and lifted it up, and I looked in, and I just remember seeing her in there. I went back to camp, grassed him up. I got called a liar, but when we got back, I told everyone. I got told to keep my mouth shut.
Despite soldiers who were there speaking to the British press, despite the Kenyan inquest into her death naming the suspects, and despite those being involved making fun of the murder online, no British soldier has been questioned or arrested over the killing. We asked Major Adrian Wheel, media representative at Batuk, for his response to Rose's claim of a cover-up.
Well, we haven't tried to cover up anything. We've assisted all the way through. There is cooperation taking place between the UK police authorities and the Kenyan police service. That's happening at a much higher level than where I work. It's a matter between governments. Batuk is not a detective agency. We can't investigate the case, but we will offer every assistance to those who are investigating the case that we possibly can.
Soldiers in Nanyuki have a bad reputation, and it's not just the most serious allegations of murder. In 2012, 200 of them were involved in a drunken bar brawl, where one was even thrown out of a window. Since then, we're told they've cleaned up their act, but it only took us a few days to see soldiers drunk, loud and aggressive, and even threatening violence. Then and now, murder, violence, and rape have been a part of Britain's presence in Kenya. During colonialism, it was systemic and widespread, especially as the British tried to crush the Mau Mau and target its leadership, like Dedan Kimathi, who was the movement's charismatic, revolutionary leader. Feared by the British, who ultimately captured and killed him, and have refused to reveal where they buried him, even today.
Nĩndatwaragĩra Kĩmathi ũhoro gĩthaka thiaga tarĩ ngũ kuna no nĩ ũhoro ndamũtwarĩra nake akagĩa na ũũgĩ nĩ ndamũhe ũrĩa wothe kũrathiĩ ũrĩa kũrerwo mũndũ mwerũ no mũndũ ũrĩ hinya no ndũkĩũĩ twarĩ andũ aingĩ rĩu arĩ kambĩ o ĩmwe.
Dedan Kimathi was a hero of this continent, not just Kenya. And by being my uncle, maternal uncle, I still value him as my hero. Dedan Kimathi wanted the proper human rights. He did not want people to grab the land of the central Kenya people. He also wanted people to be free.
He occupies such a big place in the history of Kenya.
We cannot run away from it. It has been suppressed, but it has been evolving every day, every day.
Why was he such a threat to the British government? One man.
I'm told by my father, he was very eloquent. Yes. He would meet the Mau Maus in the forests. This is a man here who wants to stop colonialism. And he's putting people together, giving them oath, and telling them we must be able to protect our land. We should not let this land go to a white man.
Absolutely.
And telling people you must be able to remove this chain of being colonized. You are equal to the task. You can also be your own rulers.
The British were so scared of Kimathi's power and influence, they had a bounty on his head. On the 21st of October, 1956, Ian Henderson, a colonial police officer who'd been on an obsessive hunt for Kimathi, shot him and captured him.
The people in the neighboring section thought that there was a buffalo being shot because the sound of the gun. Only to find out that it's Dedan Kimathi who'd been shot. And this is according to my aunties who live near there. And when they realized Dedan Kimathi who was shot, They all got shocked. And my auntie tells me Kimathi had a watch here. And so when he was lifted up, he could raise up his hand and say, hi, how are you? Take care of the land. Before he was...
Even on the stretcher?
Yes, he was still able to speak with his deadlock and what have you. And then when he was put near the chief's camp, the white man came in a Land Rover. And from that time, Kimathi switched off. He didn't want to say anything in the presence of the white man.
The photo that we see of Kimathi on the stretcher, he looks tired, they have really portrayed him as a weak person in the famous photo that the British took.
They have always tried
exactly.
to. Yes.
But what you have said about his last moments, even in his own village, being moments of encouraging people,
don't let the land go.
To rise up.
Don't let the land go.
It's a memory that
if I can even put it in Kikuyu, don't let it go. Don't the land go. Don't let the land. You know, you could see a man fighting even on his stretch.
Yes. Dedan Kimathi was killed because as a leader, he would have challenged British interests in Kenya. And Britain didn't want that. They wanted a transition to independence that they could manage, manipulate, and control. So after Kimathi's capture, they imprisoned the Mau Mau en masse in concentration camps. At least 90,000 Kenyans were executed, tortured, or maimed, all because they wanted independence. The brutality was heinous, as one soldier starkly put it in an interview with historian Caroline Elkins.
I stayed for a few hours to help the boys out, softening him up. Things got a little out of hand. By the time I cut his balls off, he had no ears and his eyeball was hanging out of his socket. Too bad he died before we got much out of him.
From the torture that happened to the dispossession, the British have pretty much gotten away with it. And it's not just, I think, theft in terms of sort of material, tangible things. You know, it's theft of history. It was theft of documents when they left. You know, till today you've got documents in the UK, you know, that detail the things that were being done here, but they've now been repatriated here. In fact, for pretty much 50 or 60 years, the British government lied about having them.
When the British left Kenya, they covered their tracks. They burnt hundreds of thousands of files and hid thousands of others at Hounslow Park, an intelligence base in England. Until 2012, they denied these files even existed. Now, some have been declassified. We've looked through hundreds of these documents, and what they reveal are shocking. Not just because of the violence they contain, but of the political paranoia they disclose. In this document, they are worried about the questions Mau Mau are asking in their meetings about Pan-African leaders, imperial violence, and communism.
You know, it is instructive that this letter is written to the Director of Intelligence and Security in Nairobi. And is not only targeting Kenya, it is targeting the entire Africa. They talk about Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. They talk about Belgian Congo. They are talking about communism. And it's a paradox and an irony at once that the Mau Mau, whom had been branded savages, are now being feared because they will be communists. Remember that this is the period of the emergence of the Cold War, and the West is now afraid, particularly the British, that if we don't take control of them, then they'll gravitate toward the Soviet Union. This is classical imperialism. This is classical neocolonialism. Grant them political independence, but ensure that you continue to control them, and those within their ranks who are independent-minded, kill them, demonstrate that they cannot survive because they are communists. Tragedy. Tragic.
What the Hounslow disclosure undoubtedly proves is that brutality and torture was sanctioned right from the very top of government in London down to the prison guards here in Kenya. In this letter from September 1952, we see that Europeans in Laikipia are enacting a policy to murder 10 Kikuyu for every European murdered. In this particular letter, 2 women are beaten and raped after they're ordered to collect firewood for a home guard post. This same letter details how 9 detainees are killed on separate occasions. I showed journalist Patrick Gathara one letter by long-standing colonial officer Kenneth Hunter, who says the African primitive mind is best suited to punishments like the amputation of a hand or arm and public ridicule like the stocks.
Wow. Okay. Well, it's always surprising. I mean, you know, some of these attitudes are there. It's always like quite shocking when you see it in black and white, you know, and the fact that they didn't feel like they were doing anything wrong, you know, and very much like they were dealing actually with human beings, because they're speaking here of essentially humiliation, as if they were animals, you know, almost like, you know, to deprive them of their humanity. And it's something you see going on till today in our prisons, when people are arrested by police, you know, humiliation is a really big part of your interaction with the state. You know, and it's one of those insidious things that has remained, you know, even after the British left.
Today, humiliation and police violence are particularly stark in Kenya's poorest areas like Kibra, also known as Kibera. It's one of the biggest slums in Africa.
If you look at the police system, what we are using in the police system in Kibra is something that was used during colonial time. And Kenya as a country adopted that. And in Kibra, all young people will be criminalized. So with that aspect, looking at how the security system, the police has been working in Kenya, killing young people in my community and normalizing extrajudicial killing, using the system of colonization up to date in my community where we come from, it has really affected us. And for me, I feel like we are still under slavery in a different way, in a capitalistic way, because so many leaders in Africa adopted the white supremacy ideology. And that is what they're implementing today in Kenya.
You know, if you look at the disparity in our country today, 65% of Nairobians live in informal settlements. Informal settlements which sprouted up during the colonial period. The largest landowners in this country are the political class. One could very well say that the white man left and black men came, but the culture is the same.
Before the white man left, he sowed the seeds of class inequality. In fact, the creation of Kibra is rooted in colonialism. In those days, this didn't count as Nairobi. It's where white Europeans housed their black soldiers and later their black workers. Today, not much has changed.
In Kibra today, people will move from rural area to urban area and they come up in an informal settlement like Kibra, which people are living in poverty. You spend your days looking for a job, and if it is a job that you are getting, you get a Juakali job that is really underpaying you. These slums were created to serve the other side. That was the purpose of colonization.
To serve the elite.
The elite. Like people who live in Karen, people who live in Gong Road, and people who live in South Sea. So women will come from Kibra to go and work in South Sea. But how much are they paid? Remember, this woman, maybe she didn't go to school. She doesn't understand her rights. She's subjected to so many things. Number one, rape. Sexual violence is common. Their bosses have exploited them. Underpayments, unpaid care work, all this form of oppression, so that they can continue being in this space, living in poverty, and they can continue facing oppression all the time.
The other side is Karen, one of the most affluent suburbs in Kenya, named after Karen Blixen, the aristocrat who owned this entire area. This is another place I would not have been able to enter in colonial times, and one that is still not very welcoming today.
This is one of the most haunting reminders of what colonial Kenya was. It became the party scene of colonial Kenya. against that, it was also a cesspool of violence and exploited labor, because Karen Blixen had almost 6,000 hectares of land, so it had to be toiled, labored by the native class.
Now the word Karen has taken on a different connotation, especially modern day lingo.
It's such a well-fitting word because it's not something that just came up. If you look at the legacies of colonialism, because Karen Blixen was all these things, discriminative, abusive, elitist, racist, snobbish, all the traits of a Karen today. So we're literally in the footstool of the original Karen's home. Like, this was the grandmother of all Karens.
Karen Blixen is said to have had 800 African workers on her land here. Today, white families living in Karen continue to use cheap labor from neighboring Kibra at their homes. I'm meeting with one Kibra resident who is a house help for a white family in the rich neighborhood of Karen. Every day she has to walk almost 3 hours to and from work to do a 10-hour shift. She gets paid approximately $50 a month. She didn't want to show her face in case she lost her job.
Watoto na hapo pia unajua umefuga madogi, utawaangalia, wapatie chakula ndio urudi. Nyumba pia lazima utengeneze. Sasa unapata ni hiyo kazi lazima ufanye. Ni poa juu sasa unajua venye wamebarikiwa na sisi sasa venye tuko hapa venye hatuwezi tukatafia ile maisha. Unajua kule ni kusafi na huku ni kuchafu. Then kule kila mtu akona choo yake. Huku unajua hatuna hata machoo. Kule vingine mtu anakuna nyumba yake, anafanya kile kitu kwa nyumba yake. Na huku hakuna hizo hata bafu.
Until a few decades ago, Karen residents were mostly British. Today, they are joined by Americans, Europeans, and Kenyan upper elite. And that's by design. The British plan to create this super rich Kenyan land-owning class.
In the run-up to independence in the early 50s, there was a plan called the Swinnerton Plan. And the idea behind it was to create an African landowning class. And that this class would then have interests that are congruent to the interests of the colonials and would then defend the colonials. And that's pretty much how it turned out.
At the moment, Karen has been taken over not by white settlers, but also, again, this very well-packaged class that learns from the white settlers and is an ally to the colonial front. Was there truly a transition between colonial and post-colonial Kenya? So, like, there's a very thin line. The British and many other imperial actors are still in power. For example, we've spoken about Karen Blixen, but it's not just Karen Blixen at the time. The Karen Blixens of today have occupied Nanyuki, for example. There's the colonial outpost of the British troops.
Back in Nanyuki, conservationist Dr. Mordecai Ogada tells me there are special interests that have kept the British in this area.
Batuk is the British Army training unit in Kenya, which is based in Nanyuki and has basically been based here since before independence. The reason why it's based in Nanyuki is not immediately apparent, but it is because of a special interest that Britain has in this part of the country. The amount of effort, financial investment, violence, and policy manipulation that's been put into keeping these lands in Laikipia sort of as an enclave.
What are these special interests?
These special interests include mineral deposits. There's a lot of iron ore.
Is this heavily secured area the Batuk base?
Yes, this is the main Batuk base, and with the yellow barriers, so all the operations are based here, and that's one of their operations vehicles.
So the entire extent of this fence is the base itself?
Yes, correct. Yeah, this double fencing is the base area.
It seems quite vast. Would you know how many acres of land it occupies?
I'd estimate that it's at least 3,000 acres because it extends even to there's a firing range up ahead, and you can see it's quite extensive.
What does it say about post-independence Kenya that Batuk has remained a permanent base?
This is an indication that there are certain things that were excluded by the idea of independence or sovereignty in Kenya. And this is one of them. And we can tell because of the way in which legal problems that involve Batuk are treated. These are including things like the death of Agnes Wanjiru. They're all sort of swept under the carpet and hush-hushed.
Naumaga sana. Na mpaka hata sasa tujaona nini yake. Kĩhoto gĩake tũtirĩ twakiona. Miaka 10 sasa ni miaka 11. Itapatikana lini? Unashindwa itapatikana lini? Na hakuna mtu nitaenda kuuliza.
Although her family disputed, Agnes is said to have been a sex worker, which is why she was at a hotel room with a British soldier. In fact, sex work is rife in Nanyuki.
I've been a sex worker for the past 12 years. The British Army are the backbones of the sex work business because when they are around, the girls earn very well. The services that you will offer the British Army for 10,000 is the same services that you will offer our local men with $500,000. They may be they will ask for some weird services and they know the girls are really in need of that money due to poverty.
What are the kind of cases you've had around violence or rape with regards to British soldiers?
We do have cases, but reporting them is a problem. Because as you know, our government kind of favor them. Most of the girls who undergo violation from the British, they even don't say, they keep it silent.
I spoke to one sex worker on condition of anonymity. She told me she's been raped by a British soldier here.
We went to his apartment and we didn't agree of anything. So he forced himself on me. When he forced himself on me, it was very nasty to me.
This was a British soldier?
Yes. I went home and decided to go and report to the police.
When she was called in 2 weeks later, she says there was a British man at the police station with all her information. Soon after, the report she recorded there went missing.
It was very difficult for me because even you feel very bad, you feel like you hate yourself, you feel very bad, but you cannot do anything about it. You feel abused, but because your background is not good, you are defenseless.
With rape victims too scared to speak out and murder victims still waiting for justice, it feels like British impunity is leaving a trail of trauma and pain. It's a trail that leads right back to colonial violence here.
Ni kama haijabadilika. Ni kama kunakuwa ni kama wakati huo wa mkoro. Kama wanatoka na huko kwao wanakuja wanaua mtu na wanaenda kwao. Si unaona bado kuja nini?
I think that was one of the hardest interviews I've ever done because of the violence with which Agnes' life was treated towards the end of her death. What's even harder to imagine is that the government inquest actually states that there's a possibility that Agnes might have been alive when her body was put into the septic tank. It's hard to think that Kenya, 60 years after independence, we are still seeing the same things that we saw during the colonial times. That British people have the right to treat Kenya as their playground, to do anything they want, to commit heinous acts, and still not face the repercussions for it.
The British have never faced justice. That is why they still run around the world pretending to tell us what to do. You know, one of the most painful statements that I ever heard in my life was from a former British Prime Minister, Tony Blair, when he said that Africa is a scar on the conscience of the world. How dare he? It is because we have never asked them to answer for their atrocities. The day they do, they will know that we are truly angry. They have never. And that is why some of us are very serious about this whole idea of reparations and proper apology. They have never apologized.
With no apology or even real acknowledgement of past and present atrocities, and a reluctance to engage with the growing calls for reparations, especially after the death of the British Queen, it's easy to feel anger and hard to think justice is around the corner, even after 60 years. It leaves me wondering, what does all this say about the independence and sovereignty of Kenya?
The independence and sovereignty of Kenya, it's on the way, but it's not here yet. Colonialism is just being found out, sort of where it's been hiding. The younger generation are more inquisitive, and I think that's what will eventually drive colonialism away.
Colonization affected our thoughts, it affected our minds, and it has affected our way of living as Black African people. We need a space where African now can reclaim their power back, they can reclaim their resources, and we need to decolonize all this system, to be sincere.
We've got to revise our history books. We've got to revise our attitudes toward the colonizer. We've got to revise how we deal with the British and how we relate to them. We can't do it, we must do it, and wisdom demands that we learn from the past in order to ensure that we have a good future for this generation and generations yet to be born.